Hello, and welcome to my video on modern removal and how it relates to 8-Rack. I asked myself the other day, what's the best removal package for 8-Rack in modern, and why? I didn't want to just take conventional wisdom and go with the status quo, and I didn't want to base my decisions on playing a few games, having an emotional response to a win or a loss, and thinking to myself, this one's the best. I wanted to look at statistics and empirical evidence and really find out what spells miss what creatures, when and why is push better than bolt, etc. To that end, I looked at the last 2 months of top 8 decks from MTG Top 8. I went through all the creatures. I added up everything. There was 235 unique creatures in all the top 8 finishes. Of that, I broke it down for what spell kills what, based on toughness, based on exile. I looked at what demanded an exile versus just could have been killed by a terminate anyway. I looked at what needed to be sacrificed. I looked at, especially focusing on what push killed and what dismember killed, what push and dismember, how they stacked up to each other, really. I was also really interested in how Bolt stood up against Magma Spray or any of the 2-drop removals, 2 toughness removals, rather, like a Disfigure or a Collective Brutality or a Forked Bolt. What I found was that of the 235 modern creatures, Path killed 221 of them. The only things that Path really missed were the creatures that demanded a sacrifice. Hexproof things, Boggles, Thrun the Last Troll, the Green-White Angel, which prevented other creatures from being sacked and was itself hexproof. Liliana and Pox with a sacrifice killed the second most creatures, 211. The only things it was really missing was the 20 or so creatures that really demanded an exile. Things that had recurrence like Kitchen Finks, things that left tokens behind like Worm Coil, even things that would draw you a card after, like the 4-drop 2/2 from Bluetron. The next highest was Terminate and Murderous Cut, just straight destroy things. The only things it was missing was the Hexproof and the ones that wanted exile. Dismember came in above Fatal Push in number of targets that it hit at 183 versus 169. Bolt came in at 145, which was really interesting because the number of 3 toughness creatures compared to the number of 2 toughness creatures, there's only 123 2 toughness versus 145. Bolt really didn't come that far ahead as what I expected it to, and the only decks that it really requested Bolt, that Bolt will really edge it out, was the Zoo decks, was Nullcat and the Loam Lion and the Curd Apes. Other than that, 2 toughness kill spells really hit the mark for the vast majority of things. And when you consider that Magma Spray hit 14 of the exile creatures, the difference between Magma Spray and Bolt really wasn't that big when considering only a removal spell and not going to the face. Lastly, the 61 cards with 1 toughness that could be killed by a Dark Blast or a Funeral Charm, I couldn't have been more disappointed by how low of a number that turned out to be. I thought there would be a lot more targets for the 1-drop slot. I probably won't be playing Charm or Dark Blast in the future because that's a representation of only 26% of the current meta. Regarding which slot to pick, I really divided the 8-Rack removal package into 2 different slots: fast removal and broad removal. Regarding the fast removal, I really wanted 1-drop things that would hit little guys and come out on turn 1 or turn 2 and be a painless, easy removal, quick, just to get rid of things like Goblin Guide and Monastery Swiftspear, Bob and Snapcasters. I didn't want Dismember for this slot because no one wants to pay 4 life on turn 1 to dismember Goblin Guide. That's not realistic. Regarding the broad spectrum cards, I ignored everything that wasn't particularly good. I narrowed it down to Go for the Throat, Doomblade and Slaughter Pact, Path, Dismember Victim, Murderous Cut and Terminate. I don't mind splashing a color for a better removal spell because there's nothing in black right now that literally hits everything the way Terminate or Path can hit nearly everything. Also, when you want to trigger Revolt for Fatal Push, it's it's going to be a fetch land with 8-rack, and we might as well be splashing a color anyways to hit that. So these things were considered. Regarding the differences between the 4 traditional mono black removal spells, Go for the Throat misses a total of 17 creatures in Modern. 11 of those are actually legitimate creatures that you will see regularly. When putting Path and Push and Go for the Throat next to each other, that combination ends up only missing 2 creatures in all of Modern: Wormcoil Engine and Platinum Angel. When we do the same thing for Doomblade, we end up with a lot more misses. 20 creatures in Modern will be missed by Doomblade specifically. 6 of those you see on a regular basis, like Death Shadow, Bob, Tasigur. When you put Doomblade and Fatal Push together, the only 2 creatures you end up missing are Tasigur and Gurmag Angler. When you do that with Dismember, you miss 17 creatures with the combination of Fatal Push and Dismember. 7 of them are commonly played, and some of the bigger ones that you'll miss with that combination are Primetime, Wormcoil, and World Breaker. Interestingly, Victim of Night comes out ahead in this comparison. It only misses 9 creatures in all of Modern. 3 of them are commonly played, and when combined with Fatal Push, there's only 1 creature that they can't kill, and that's Gurmag Angler. Comparing Dismember to Fatal Push, these are the creatures from the past 2 months of all top 8 decks that Dismember can kill, that Fatal Push cannot. Some of these I recognize are not the most commonly played, some fringe things. The Craterhoof Behemoth came from Tooth and Nail deck. There was one blue-white control playing the Dragon Lord. This Bedlam Reveler is a little bit more relevant. There was 4 decks in the past, blue and red things that run Goblin Electromancers and a whole bunch of little 1-mana blue cantrips on top of the regular burn package. Skred is running 4. There was 4 Skred decks in the top 8 past 2 months that were running Storm Breath Dragons. Some of the mono green Stompies are running Hooting Mandrills. Every now and again you see a Tombstalker in place of a Tasigur and a Grixis. But realistically, these are the 5 that Dismember will hit, that Push misses out on. And I do think they are relevant. There's a lot of Eldrazi, there's a lot of Grixis control, and Bluetron is still around, and they're still playing Platinum Angels. Interestingly, there are these cards, which Push will kill, and Dismember will not. As you'll see, most of them are toughness changing based on life totals and graveyards and such. I do think it is relevant, though. Part the Waterveil token is the only one that's always going to be within a Push and outside of Dismember. This list is all of the cards that Dismember will miss, but a Murderous Cut or a Terminate will hit. I did put the World Breaker, Wormcoil, and Worldspine Worm on there. They really do want an exile and not just a straight kill, but I put them on the list anyway. Also recognizing a lot of these are fringe things, like Dragonlord Atarka. He was in 1 copy of Tooth and Nail. Some of these are a lot more relevant, though, that you will see on a regular basis, like Primeval Titan. You really do want a full removal for Primeval Titan. It sucks when he's about to attack and the Valakut triggers that he's about to produce are going to be lethal, and you wish you had a Victim of Night in your hand, but instead you've got a Dismember and he's going to survive that. Sun Titan shows up every now and again, Sundering Titan, these are around. Once in a while I see a Torrential Gearhulk in some of the blue splash control decks. These are the ones that you really are going to want to pick a Terminate or a Victim of Night or a Dismember for. It's really disheartening when you Dismember, especially paying 4 life, for a 5/5 Death Shadow, and they bolt their own face in response and survive it, and crack back for lethal next turn. Same thing can happen with a Tarmogoyf. They'll crack lands, they'll throw bolts, the Goyf is often going to be a 5/6. Knight of the Reliquary will often come down as a 6/6. If you try to Dismember an Arcbound Ravager, they'll often just wipe their entire board to make it a 6/6 and then hit you for lethal next turn. Same thing with Wormcoil and World Breaker when you're fighting against Tron. Holding a Dismember in your hand can be less stellar when Wormcoil lethal is on the table. Looking at Path, I was really surprised and disappointed that Path really wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be when compared to Terminate. It really only came down to these 5 cards that really wanted an exile and were bigger than 2 toughness that Path would hit and Terminate would not. And even when you look at this list, Worldspawn Worm from Gristle Shoal, you're not fighting them with Path to Exile. You're fighting them with breaking the combo. Same thing with Tron and Worldbreaker here, and Wormcoil. You should be getting them off lands. You should be messing them up in other ways. You shouldn't be thinking, I need a Path specifically for Wormcoil because that's the only real answer. Same with Dredge. You're fighting their graveyard. You're not trying to Path a single Prized Amalgam here. Really interesting when you compare what Path hits with what Magma Spray can hit. Almost all of these creatures that are really wanting an exile, they're all 2 toughness, and they're all struck by Flaying Tendrils. And what's really nice about Flaying Tendrils is it doubles in our sideboard against Affinity, against Merfolk, against Elves. It also, when you look at Voice of Resurgence and Kitchen Finks decks and this Abzan Coco thing that's running a bunch of Eternal Witnesses, they're going wide anyway. So Flaying Tendrils is just great in that situation. Same thing with Bloodghast. You're going to be wanting to hit Narcomoebas as much as you're going to want to hit the Bloodghast, so Flaying Tendrils is great in this spot. I recognize that Eternal Witness doesn't require an exile specifically on its own, but Eternal Witness into Kitchen Finks can be really frustrating, and that kind of recurrence and card advantage versus 8-rack can be devastating. So yeah, he made the list for Please Exile Witness. Comparing Flaying Tendrils and Anger of the Gods, it turns out there's 3 things in Modern that Flaying Tendrils will kill that Anger of the Gods will not. In the Etched Champions, Master Waves, the things with the pro-red. Anger of the Gods is a little bit better for Prize Amalgam, and this Scourge Devil thing, which since the banning of Golgari Troll, it's popping up in a couple of Dredge decks. I don't know if it'll stick around or not. Also, Double Lord situations, Anger does shine versus Flaying Tendrils there. In summary, in my opinion, the best removal package for 8-rack right now in this meta is the combination of Fatal Push and Terminate. This hits the widest variety of creatures, and it leaves the sideboard slot for the exile, because you don't need the exile main board all of the time. And Flaying Tendrils versus Anger of the Gods in the sideboard, it hits 14 out of the 20 cards that you really want to exile. Should you choose to mono black and not splash a color for Terminate, Fatal Push and Victim of Night really edge it out. The difference between Victim of Night and Dismember for that large creature slot versus like Prime Times versus Wormcoil, it matters, and the life saving is important because you're spending that life on fetches for Fatal Push, and Flaying Tendrils in the sideboard for all of the same reasons. Thanks for watching.